Hello and welcome along to another episode of the Tackling Sport podcast. It's Daniel Hussey here doing a series of interviews and topic shows, and one of the topics we wanted to discuss on the show is male body image. So I'm delighted to welcome, first of all, two guests from the show, or two previous guests of the show. Firstly, Cormac Ryan, former Dublin minor and under-21 goalkeeper. Cormac, how are you keeping?
Everything's lads.
And Eoin Kelly, so Eoin, who's from Modus Learning and also won the Wicklow Senior Club Championship there last year.
Unfortunately not a former
the
Dublin Under-21 or something.
Yeah.
But no, unfortunately not Dublin Under-21. No, intermediate. It was intermediate.
Intermediate, yeah.
Not quite as classy as being involved in the Dublin Under-21s, but you know.
I'd take the county medal.
I
don't have one of them. I'd take one of them.
I take either, lads, I'll be honest with you, but a couple of junior semi-final defeats last 2 years, so if you don't mind, we'll just move on. But lads, I thought I'd get the 2 years on because we'll go to you first, Eoin, because I think it's an important topic to discuss. So I just wanted you to maybe give an overview firstly to your own experience, maybe firstly with training a lot and maybe overtraining and maybe sometimes being a little bit obsessive.
Yeah, I think it's funny when you think of body image. It's probably something that it's probably not spoken about enough with guys and stuff, but probably affects guys just as much as it is girls. I know people put a lot of emphasis with social media and things, and girls have a lot of pressure with kind of look and the aesthetics, but I think it is as much pressure with lads as well. And I think with sport, it's one of those things that become obsessive as well, because your body is your machine. It's the thing you use to perform. So you can kind of get yourself in a state where training becomes training, but then if you get too kind of conscious then about the kind of body shape and size and physicality, I know in my case it was GAA, and that's become an incredibly kind of athletic and aggressive. I suppose size-wise, people are coming out kind of a lot more athletic in the GAA these years than they have probably in the past, and I suppose body image has become a bigger thing. I suppose it comes down to a lot of things, be it size, physicality, height now is a big differentiator in GAA and things like that. So, I mean, I think, at least in sport, I think for men anyway, it's something that I think affects a lot of guys and can kind of leave certain lads feeling like they're inadequate, you know. Now, whether it's spoken about enough outside of that, I don't know. But seeing personally, it's been probably from a sport perspective and the pressure that gets put onto you to kind of form a certain physique and athletic size to kind of fit the role, particularly I think as it's become more professional in GAA anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Cormac, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about your own story with your body weight?
Yeah, I suppose mine was kind of a funny one. I ended up getting a pacemaker when I was 18, and obviously at that age you weren't really expecting something like that, so it became kind of mentally, it kind of destroyed me for the guts of a year afterwards. And I wasn't exercising, I wasn't really allowed exercise, and inevitably I just, between my mood and lack of activity, I put on probably 1.5 stone, 2 stone. And even still at the time when that was happening, I didn't really have any awareness of my weight. It was really only when a couple of comments were made to me, kind of more negative comments from someone who I would have been close enough to, that it kind of really resonated with me in quite a negative fashion. And that's kind of where it started. And I suppose, similar to what Eoin was saying then, I probably became hyper aware of it from being involved with higher level teams. So the initial comments would have been made that would have really affected me, and then it just got exacerbated by being in such environment. Like being in a county 21 setup, when you're in a dressing room with 30 other lads who are in serious physical condition, you can't help but notice it. And it kind of made me a bit obsessive with trying to drop a bit of weight, drop a bit of body fat, become leaner, to look like my peers as such. And over then a period of years, like I was under 21 in 2013 and 14, and then over the past kind of 4, 5, 6 years, it just kind of gradually becomes more heightened, and my patterns and behaviors got more restrictive, and then you become more obsessive, and that's really kind of where it came from. It was never anything crazy extreme. It was a lot of strange behaviors obsessive behaviors, restrictive patterns that gradually just got worse and worse. And although none of them on their own were quite extreme, they ended up having not an extreme, I'm hesitant to say extreme effect on my life, but debilitating in many sort of ways, really. And we can get more into, I suppose, those behaviors or what that actually looked like, or what that or how that transpired. But that's really kind of how it started with me. One or two comments. Yeah, it was just simple comments made about what I looked like. And I'm here 9 years later still trying to get a grip on it.
It's interesting.
Go on.
It's interesting, actually, the way you said it about it. It was a comment, because it was kind of similar to me, I suppose. It was always an awareness that, you know, in my case, it was probably like gaining weight more so than actually losing it. But it was as you kind of got to more of the kind of elite level or higher level in sport, it was like you had to be a certain weight, size, physical strength. And for me, that was always a challenge. And I know it was something I was aware of, and you were always trying to compensate for that. Just in general, you'd work harder maybe in the gym, or you'd get you try and make up for that in other aspects of maybe your performance. But then it was a comment from a coach, ironically, saying that you're not going to make it at the size you're at, and unfortunately we can't trust you out there unless you're bigger, so you got to work on that. And I remember sitting there going, like, I am maxing out as much as I can do. There's only so much your genes will allow you to grow to until you're not going to be able to do it anymore, and you're going to injure yourself. And I'm the same. It led to serious, probably, I'm the same as you. I'd be afraid to go as far as saying it was like serious like impact or issues in my kind of the way I live my life, but it was in some cases debilitating, and led to small habits and small, you know, debilitating kind of mindsets in certain ways around kind of body weight and size and physique and things like that. That I suppose, yeah, like you, I wouldn't go so far as to say it was really serious and like it was dangerous, but I suppose there was points where it was obsessive that, you know, was unhealthy, you know, mentally, if anything.
It's kind of like common theme, I think, is you're always kind of comparing yourself, Cormac, I guess. Like, and you hear those comments and then you start looking like I think sometimes you can live in a kind of bliss ignorance of, you know, when you're kind of happy with your body and you're not really noticing. But I guess when you get a comment or two like that, I can relate to that. And then you suddenly start looking at everyone and realize, okay, maybe like, if you keep comparing yourself, you're always going to find someone that's quote unquote, you know, like you think is in a better shape than you, for example.
Yeah. And like, it's like comparison. What is it they say? Comparison's the thief of joy. But I found it quite funny. It was, I can hand on heart say everything over the past 7, 8, 9 years has never been out of vanity. It was never so that I could go on holiday with the lads and take the photo by the pool. And at the same time, it was never really to do with performance. It was out of this completely irrational fear that developed about putting on weight, or that I would ever be in that situation again where someone made a comment about my appearance. And then being in an environment, whether it was County 21, whether it was Fitzgibbon Cup, whether it was senior hurling, people are obviously in good shape when they're around you. So you do then look at others and think, if I could look like that, or if that part of my body could look like that. And it's just funny what it does to you. I don't know why. I have always had this weird paranoia about my legs going out on a gap pitch, and it sounds absolutely bonkers, like, but I'd be getting togged for a game and I could run into the jacks and I could end up catching myself looking at my legs for, I don't know why, because I felt like they needed to be ripped or something. It was weird how it manifested itself in me. It was never really, oh, I wish I looked like him completely, or it was never, oh, I want to look better and I want to look huge on a pitch, or it was just this irrational fear that someone would pass comment or that I would put on an extra few pounds. I really, that's kind of how it manifested with me. But it can come about in a whole array of different ways.
Yeah, and for your, like, tell us a little bit more about yourself. So it must have been hard for you to like want to get big, and you, like you said, you maxed out.
Yeah, it's funny because you kind of grow up and, when you're younger and it's not as big a deal. And when you're kind of going through your ages, 14, 15, 16, you almost see it as, if anything, it's almost a badge of honor. You're competing against guys who may be bigger. You find yourself working on little things that kind of set you apart, and size isn't your advantage, or you find other ways to perform. It was always a case where I was like, it's a kind of a control thing as well, I suppose. For me, it was like I can always be in control of, my performance and the training I do. I can be in control of like, it's control in certain things, the gym and work I do. But then when it comes to a case where someone says, oh no, you're not going to be big enough to perform at senior county level, you need to get bigger. And being so aware of it, because obviously I had to work very hard just to maintain a certain level of weight, meant that, you're kind of going like, it's now taken out of my hands. It's out of my control. I can't influence my chances of playing. And I think that was kind of that was a tough thing probably to realize, because it kind of puts you in a position where you're kind of going like, when you put all that effort in, it's then something that, you're prevented from achieving a dream, not for your own fault. It's just, chance of birth. It's your size, it's your genetics, it's just the way you are. And I mean, the comment wasn't helpful. Now, I suppose what's ironic is, the coach at the time talked at length about his own issues with his own body image. Him, in a sense, was more losing weight. And he used to talk to us a lot about the challenges he had, and at times the depression he experienced playing county football and struggling to lose weight and being mocked at times. And this was at a time probably when, it probably was a lot harsher of an environment. But then I suppose it was then ironic that that was the kind of comment he made to me. And I suppose I quit on that day, or the following day. I've never played county football since. I called him a couple of days later and said, I'm not doing anymore. Because once he said that you weren't you're not at a size that you're going to be able to compete, I knew it wasn't really going to change drastically, that I was suddenly going to come back, weighing, 10 kilos heavier. I was like, well, that's game over. And I suppose that was tough, because it was kind of taken out of my hands, that decision. And but it is funny how, like, slowly but surely, it's hard to kind of lose the little kind of habits that you built up from that. And that's things like, standing onto the weighing scales, then getting bothered then if you've dropped a little bit of weight. And that's still, still to this day, I do have to kind of, force myself not to do it, and get rid of a weighing scales in my house so that I don't.
I was just going to ask, are you still weighing yourself and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's something that I do and I don't, and I go through little periods of time where it's really probably heightened, and I find myself doing it regularly. And then, probably more recently, I've noticed, I've been able to step away from it. Maybe over Christmas, people tend to kind of give themselves a bit of a break, so maybe, you're able to kind of relax and not worry about it too much. But then again, it's not really healthy either, because you could, particularly when you're trying to gain weight as well, because, you could then find yourself standing on scales going, Jesus, I'm like 3 kilos heavier, but it might be because you've just been on the boozer for like a few weeks and you've been enjoying good food over Christmas. So again, that's fine, but it mightn't be healthy weight. So you mightn't be any healthier and better shape or anything from the previous time, but the weight thing kind of is the thing that you're looking at. So the thing is, the number on the scale is not a very healthy thing to be judging yourself on. And I think that's a problem as well.
Oh, and just actually, can I just jump in there? Did you ever, it's interesting that we're probably both on the opposite sides of this issue, but at the same time, it still has very similar effects on our behaviours. Did you ever feel the pressure so much where you considered other means of gaining weight? And it's funny that this has come up, because me and Dan were actually just briefly on this topic before you actually came on. Did you ever think, should I, like, you hear stories about rugby players and steroids, and like, did the pressure ever come so much that you ever considered that?
I suppose I hadn't, because I was able to perform to my level for so long. Like, I always had the pressure, but it hadn't sort of prevented me from getting a chance up until the very end. Yeah, that I probably it hadn't been surviving long enough. If it had been going longer, maybe I would have. Now, I tried everything. I never went as far as going to. I would have been very strong on supplements and different things. I would have done a huge amount of research myself on, the different supplements I take. I never would have gone as far as even considering, steroids or anything like that. But then I suppose it was because it was only right at the end, after I was probably on the road of training at that point, since I was about 18 to about 22, consistently, never having a break. Your club into county over winter, you're never really getting any time off. So by the time it got around to being told that, I was so tired from all that training, and it was almost like the last straw. And it was like, I'm done then. So I probably didn't have long enough to deal with, being straight out told, you're not big enough, to then kind of push myself to go and do it, because then I stepped away. I suppose up to that point, I've been able to kind of, negotiate around it, and avoid getting down to that route. But I suppose, there were definitely times where I definitely did research it. Not that I ever considered it, but there had been times where I looked online and I was trying to understand like the negatives of it. And like, is there any kind of alternative to the like real negative stories you hear, that maybe there's this halfway house? There were definitely times where I was looking for a lot of answers, and probably spent money on, various different, fitness programs and various different supplements, and like saving up money for it just to try and, find an answer to it. And I remember, like, it's funny, I have little things at home, like I have weights and stuff at home in my parents' house that, I got when I was probably about 13, 14. And I mean, I suppose that was before anyone told me I wasn't big enough, but I've grown up always being the smallest kid. Now, obviously, when kids are growing up, everyone grows at different ages. So there's always, you get that funny age group at 13, 14, where some kids are about 3 foot nothing and some kids are 6 foot with a beard. And it's just the way like it happens. But I was quite conscious of that from a young age. And, I have weights at home that I would have, gotten at quite a young age, and was teaching myself a lot about the fitness side of it, probably a lot earlier than it became normal, to actually have it as part of a team. Because I suppose when I was playing 14s, 15s, 16s, I don't think, obviously at adult football, sports science had come into it, but, gymming and stuff like that hadn't really, and athletic ability hadn't gotten down to those age groups yet. Now, I suppose these days it probably is in some capacity now at county level, but it wasn't back then. So I was trying to get a step ahead, but I did research it, but never really got to the point where I seriously considered it.
Yeah, Cormac, what about that obsession with the weighing scales that we touched on there?
Oh yeah, it's been there. It's still is there to a point. I try not to allow myself to do it. Like me now versus me 2 years ago is quite different in terms of behaviours and kind of what I do. But yeah, the weighing scales was definitely a thing. I try and pull myself away from it now, because I know it doesn't really. I have enough sports science and physiology background to know that it's not really an accurate reflection of a lot of stuff. More than the weighing scales, the mirrors is what I kind of struggle with. In terms of trying not to spend too much time looking at it. And it's still something I do, and it's something I haven't really been able to nip quite in the bud as much as the weighing scales. And it's a really unhealthy behaviour, and I probably still do it most days. And I'm doing it, but I don't really know what I'm looking for. Because I know
sometimes you're looking for the perfect body, I guess.
Again, yeah, I don't know, because I don't know if ever for me it was really about having a six pack or anything like that. It's a funny one, Dan. It's like I do it to reassure myself that I haven't in fact put on weight. And it might sound like I'm not telling the truth there, but I can hand on heart say this has never been a vanity, like a vanity in the true sense about, oh, I want to look deadly. It's been in behaviors to, okay, I'm still in relatively okay condition. I haven't put on weight. That pizza I had last night hasn't affected me, like really irrational stuff. And I know I'm doing it, but they're very hard behaviors to crack. The weighing scales one, I've gotten on a bit better with cracking over the past year or two. The mirror, having a full length mirror in my room probably doesn't help. But I still find it hard to not look at it. It's just one of those obsessive behaviors that I'm working on, but it's actually one of the ones that is probably more ingrained in me. To be honest.
out of curiosity, Cormac, I suppose with your kind of sports science, or like, you know, your background kind of in physiotherapy and things like that, like, did you find like, is the constant kind of challenge in your head, because, you know, you have your, you know, your background where, you know, this stuff is bad and like you can tell your stuff is bad, but then you have the other side of you that's actually has these habits and these behaviors. So you, I suppose you're constantly telling yourself, I know this is really bad practice and I know the way I should be thinking, but I can't get my head around it. That must be
absolutely. It's like a constant tug of war. Like, and it's the same. Like, that's what I mean in terms of the weighing scales. I know enough to know not to take the number on the scales as a big deal. But I don't always listen to that advice. I also know enough to know that recovery is absolutely essential to for the body to get adaptation. But yeah, I don't necessarily always do it, because I tend to abuse exercise in terms of keeping my mind healthy, which isn't a great thing to do. And I probably don't get the best value out of all the training I do, because I'm at it every day, and I don't listen to the knowledge that I have inside saying, if you take a rest day, you'll probably get more benefit. And it's a constant tug of war. Like, and even on the diet front, my other half is the dietitian. Like,
that's so funny. My other half is the dietitian as well.
Yeah, there you go. Like, there's the irony of it. Like, it's but there is, and this is the thing about it, there is no there's no way, like, these type of thoughts and behaviors can affect anyone. And I think it's probably strange that you've 3 men here in their mid-20s talking about it, but I definitely think a lot of these behaviors are out there.
Yeah, just one for myself before I let you in. Like, weighing scales was something I thank God never got fully obsessed with, but as soon as you mentioned, or Cormac mentioned, the mirror, it kind of like it resonated, like, and it's something that I kind of do myself a lot without realizing that it's probably not the best thing in the world to be doing. And you might wake up one morning and you look all right, and then other days you might wake up and you don't look great. Like, you know, it's just, again, for me anyway, like, it's kind of chasing, you know, a perfect body by magic sometimes, and I guess that's never gonna reflect in the mirror, and on that basis then it's probably not a good exercise to be doing all the time.
Dan, just out of interest, and go into as little or as much detail as you wish, you're running the show, but do you have any sense of where that came from? Like, was it like a comment like me and Eoin, or if you don't mind me asking?
No, you're grand. It's been like I was pretty kind of chubby kid, I think. The third, fourth year anyway, and played a lot of sports. So again, by default, by training so much, I got into okay shape in terms of, like, I was pretty skinny then in sixth year, but I'd say through college, like, I was pretty heavy in terms. When I say pretty heavy, like, I would have considered myself a small bit, you know, overweight at times. Like, you know, I might train hard with the GAB, but if in the off season would put it on, and I guess I used to always have again, as the term I used earlier, a blissful ignorance, in that I wouldn't think about it too much, but I think in the back of my mind it was always there. So you'd have the look in the mirror, like, in the morning, and you then go about your day and you just wouldn't think about it, but that thought would always kind of be in the back of your mind. So for me anyway, like, and in my head I'm always that bit chubby. Even if I get myself into good condition, it doesn't sometimes matter what the mirror shows me. I'm kind of sometimes thinking, going back to that time. So it's not a comment, but like for example, like I you know, I know we'll touch on binge eating in a second, but like I'd eaten a lot of bad. I'd had a really poor diet, like, in college, and I'd almost kind of beat people to the joke kind of thing about, you know, people that are listening to this that know me, like Subway, Domino's, but I'd kind of beat people to the joke. So it didn't feel as, it's okay if I'm slagging myself as opposed to someone else, but I wasn't proud of eating that sort of food as well all the time, you know what I mean?
And has any of that, like, I know as I've gone on, my behaviors at times have gradually worsened, like, and it's even how Eoin was saying some of his have lasted as well. Has that become more heightened?
In terms of, like, I would do really well. Like, I consider this year quite good for training, but I would go through a stage where, okay, I can reward myself here, and next thing you're 2 days going, what has gone on here? Like, I'm after almost throwing that work away. So I think, again, I don't want to get too much in binge eating. We'll touch on that in a second, but I think, I kind of find myself going back to those bad habits. They're always there, like, and it always starts off with, well, it's all right, I can reward myself here, next thing. And then you just end up hating yourself. It's a cycle. Like, I should have a better relationship with food where I'm able to enjoy it the odd time, and it has improved. But like you guys have said, it's the habits are very hard if they've been ingrained in you from early on to. But in terms of looking at the mirror and stuff, like it's something I constantly do. Like I know what I can say, oh, it's grand, I'm not weighing myself, so it doesn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's an easy kind of out there in that sense, like, you know.
But that's why I think this is so important to talk about, because when I was really struggling with it, I was like, I'm going insane here. I was like, lads aren't meant to do this. Like genuinely, like I was like, am I going mad here? And the more it's been discussed in the past year or two, the more I'm starting to think, you know what, I think this is really out there amongst a lot of lads in their 20s, but it's just not really discussed, or people aren't very open about it. But I think that's what's so eye-opening about it, is that there's such, I think there's such kind of relatively normal behaviors, but they can have such kind of impact on you. They can have such a kind of profound impact on your kind of your well-being and how you feel about yourself. But I genuinely think they're out there. I know amongst the female population, it's a lot more open and probably a lot more common per se. But I think the fact that we're all saying such similar things, and yet none of us probably fit into a category of, none of us do fit into a category of what people would consider to be an unhealthy relationship with food or body image or an eating disorder necessarily, but yet they're still so restrictive in many ways.
Yeah, Owen, do you want to come in there just on?
Yeah, I think it is funny how, like, all of us have had similar experiences in different ends of the scale maybe, and also in different scenarios, but it's funny how they last, and how it kind of leads to, you know, you kind of go, yeah, I'm over it, and, you know, people might look at it and go, well, no, that's a healthy person, that's a healthy man, they're not, you know, they're not out of shape, they're not, you know, too skinny, too fat, like they're fine, like all three of us. But the thing is, like, there's, you know, it's the habits, it's the kind of mental side of it, it's the kind of obsession that, you know, on that aspect that probably doesn't get seen a lot, because it's, you know, as you said, it's the looking at yourself in the mirror, it's the standing on your scales beside the sink, you know, it's, and even small things. And I know, again, it's, you know, because my other half's a dietitian, she'll always say, like, you know, weighing yourself at different times of the day, at different times of the week, is obviously going to bring back a different number. But it's so funny how one day I weigh myself and I'm, you know, a kilo or two heavier, and I'm like feeling great. And then I just weigh myself at a slightly different time, just, you know, just because that's when I did it. And then I feel shit because I'm a kilo lighter, and she's going, yeah, but that's normal. But it's such a debilitating kind of thing. But it's funny how, you know, and I do see it, because even when you go back to training at the start of the year, you'll see it from particularly some of the older lads will be quite conscious of, you know, struggling obviously to get back in shape. You know, it might take them a bit longer to, you know, lose the Christmas weight or whatever and things like that. And it's only probably when you catch people in individuals, it'll never really come up in a big group. But like when you're training, and you might catch chatting to one of the lads, like one-on-one or whatever, and you'll see how a lot more lads are a lot more conscious about the shape they're in. You know, and it's particularly those times where you're training now these days, not because everyone's locked at home, but in the January, February, where people are coming back, and some lads are carrying a bit more weight maybe and things like that. And you hear it from those traditionally, you know, it's kind of a, you know, it's not really something lads really talk about. So what would we be talking about our body shape for? But, you know, lads don't care about the way they look. But it's funny how it is much more of a thing that I think lads concern themselves about, maybe because in sport, you know, it's a little bit more out there, because being in shape is kind of, you know, often a requirement to be able to perform. That, you know, lads, it's a more open forum where lads kind of are aware of their size and shape. Like lads walking about the street or going to the pub or meeting up with mates, they're not going to be talking about each other's weight. But when you're training for things, it, you know, lads might be doing, you know, certain, you know, they might be doing fat level tests or weight tests or things like that as part of the whole process of ramping up. And I think that's when you start to see that it does bother certain lads a little bit more. And I've noticed it with some of the older lads, the odd time you catch them who you'd never think would talk about some of the stuff, and then they're mentioning, you know, feeling a bit uncomfortable, particularly lads who probably are starting to hit 30 and they're finding it harder and longer to kind of get back in shape, are kind of getting frustrated because they feel like, I should be younger and, I should be losing the weight and faster and fitter than I was before. And I think you're starting to see how it kind of grains on certain lads. And I think it is an issue that really doesn't get talked about enough at all.
And for yourself, Owen, are you at the moment trying to still put on weight, or what are you trying to do in that regard? It is a very fluctuating kind of experience. I know there was a point where, last season I was like, I'm going to try and do it, but I'm going to try and do it healthy. And I talked to my missus. I was like, there, look, I have to get a kind of a proper dieting kind of program where I'm eating the right foods and I'm gaining the right type of weight and I'm matching it with my training. But the problem is that, that's a license for me to weigh myself a bit more. So then I just get in a negative cycle of, weighing myself too much. And, and then when you're in the middle of the season and you're training, I would have always found, I would have tried to skip out, naturally would have been pretty good at the cardio stuff, never struggled with cardio with training, thankfully. And the weight stuff was fine, but I'd always try and do less of the cardio and more of the weights, because I was always like, I'm terrified, cheating almost kind of thing.
Yeah, I do a cardio session and it's like, crap, like I need to get like a load of food into me now, because I might drop weight and all that kind of stuff. So like that kind of thing, the problem with even thinking about even trying to do it healthily is a license for me to be more aware of it. So it's not good either. And thankfully, I suppose over the last while, football's been on the off season, I've been able to probably like take my mind off it a bit. But it's funny how I do still then, go a couple of weeks without kind of being aware of it, and then I start getting anxious again that, I haven't been thinking about it and worrying about it. And I don't know, is it something you'll ever get over? It's something you just learn to kind of manage, I suppose, to a healthy extent.
And Cormac, I guess the two of us at times when I know when I was trying to lose weight, I'd kind of almost the opposite of Owen there in cheating, in the sense that maybe I won't eat the carbs that I know I need to recover, sort of thing that you mentioned earlier. Like,
yeah, I did. I've done all sorts of mad stuff. Like mine got quite unhealthy. Like for 2-3 years there when I was playing senior hurling, like it wasn't just a thing of cutting out rice or pasta. It was quite more extreme stuff that I'd be paranoid about eating a wrap or a slice of bread, or even other forms of carbs then became an issue, like a banana or an apple. Like when you're second guessing eating an apple, it's not great. And then as I said earlier, the problem was the more I restricted, obviously the more my weight maintained or even got a bit leaner. And then it was like that kind of reward feedback system in your brain. It was like, okay, this is working. So then you become more restrictive. And even like
spiral.
Yeah, and then it becomes worse. Like, and then like it's just silly stuff. Like I was meant to be playing senior hurling, like, and the week of a game, rather than upping my carbohydrate intake, I drop it. For fear that I might put on weight during the week and someone might pass comment about my appearance on the pitch. Like, just.
And did you mentioned, when you said to me about the steroids thing, did you do anything drastic yourself? Anything you're kind of going like, or even consider doing anything drastic to kind of cut weight at times?
No, I never. Well, I don't know what you classify as drastic. I never like took laxatives or tried to make myself get sick or anything like that. But
yeah, that's probably what I meant. Yeah,
I would have had very low calorie intake days, and it, like if I don't know, if I ate too much over a weekend, I might like eat 600, 800 calories the following 2 days, and they'd be made up of vegetable and meat, like, and just really restrictive stuff. I never got too extreme, but really restrictive stuff for a day or two, because I'd be making up for, or I'd go and dog myself like with a cardio session, or just like all those kind of classic behaviors, but just ones that really weren't healthy.
Yeah, I can relate a lot to the not eating carbs the week of a game nonsense that I was doing that as well when I was trying to. So like you're going into a big game and I'm like, right, if I can just keep the carbs low now, or basically don't eat carbs, I'll be in great shape, as opposed to, thinking what you should be thinking of, like the performance is obviously more important than anything there, like,
Yeah, absolutely. Like just like sugar as well. I had it up on Twitter the other day. Like I used to you wouldn't see me touching a bar of chocolate. Like I'd buy a fulfill bar and I'd cut it in half. Like cutting a fulfill bar in half. Like what are you at? And it's mad now thinking back. But like even 18 months, 2 years ago, that was the sort of crack I was at. Really, really all based upon this irrational fear of gaining weight. And like that's the sad part about it. If at least if I was doing it out of an obsession of high performance, I could in some way justify it. But my rationale for doing it was so irrational that it's just quite draining, really, to be honest. Like very draining to have to think about every single thing you eat, and for every little thing you eat to be a stressful experience, and particularly then the way it impacts your social circle. Like it could never just be the lads couldn't post in on a Thursday night being like, here, going up Teddy Rockets, do you fancy it? Like, and I'd be like, oh god, how am I going to maneuver this? Right, if I don't eat lunch, well then I might be able to get something up there like just stupid stuff, or like being out with your other half, like, and going out for a coffee and then being like, oh, we just grab lunch while we're here, like, and I'd start panicking, like just the stuff that my girlfriend in particular would have had to put up with. Yeah, just really, really draining mentally.
Yeah, and you spoke a lot when we spoke before about like you're chasing that like that, you know, in your not I know it's not like a vain thing or anything, but you're chasing that perfect shape or something, you know.
You keep yeah, exactly. And it's like whatever condition I would end up being in, it was still never good enough. Like it was still never, like, even if I got to 20% ahead of where I'm at now, it's still, there's still a chance that I might put back on weight, and it's still not enough. And just this vicious cycle. That worsened, just gradually kept worsening. Like even when I was in fourth year college in 2016, like I'd still eat a wrap, or I'd still get the occasional like takeaway. But then you fast forward to 2018, and like, no, I won't eat a wrap, I won't eat a sandwich. Like you won't get me, like it'd be a struggle going out for dinner, like just really, really kind of debilitating stuff.
And yeah, I want to come to you then in terms of like, because, you know, I don't know about you, but my Instagram feed is full of, you know, perfect bodies from influencers, and maybe that's on me sometimes, and kind of I do try and get rid of them, but they, you know, they always tend to find their way on the feed. Like that's obviously you can't. Yeah, exactly. Like that, you're looking at the perfect body, or in your perception is the perfect body there. Like that's hard for people to, if they're looking to lose weight, or if they're looking to put on weight, or they see someone we must see. Like I think there's nobody out there that wouldn't be a small bit affected by looking at what, again, like you know, sometimes will be a photoshopped, or someone's peaking for that particular photo, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's the crazy thing. I mean, they're peaking for a very particular purpose, which is to stand still with the lights in the right way and to look good in certain light, certain conditions, but for one photo basically. And instead, but you're looking at them going like, they must walk around like that, or like, how do they maintain kind of a physique like that? And I think it is something that, you know, there is a lot spoken about. You've seen that trend, I think, particularly with female influencers around, you know, showing a photo where it's photoshopped, and then the photo of it without being photoshopped, what they really look like, you know, without all the airbrush and things. And I think there is a lot to be said for, you know, there is a lot of emphasis and, you know, a lot of push on that online, but I think there's, you know, probably not as much said about it on the male side. And there's a lot to be said for, it's a very similar situation where guys are exposed to seeing lots of photos of guys in very peak condition, but again, they're peaking for a photo. I think I saw one, I can't remember who it was. It was a YouTuber or something, where he actually showed two photos of himself taken, I think, 20 minutes apart, and one he looks real bloated and actually like out of shape, like he's basically been eating constantly. Now he's very much in shape and, you know, in very good nick, but if you looked at him, you kind of think he looked like a guy just in generally good nick. And then another photo where he was like jacked, and he did a YouTube video where he was on his Instagram. I'd have to find it. I'll find it sometime. I might send it on to you, Dan. You can throw it in the show notes. But basically he did it where he showed how one photo was taken with the light in the wrong way, and he was just kind of walked in out of the cold, and the light was just kind of pointing in the wrong direction, or he was just standing casually and he wasn't trying to pose or anything, and he looked just kind of in good shape, but that was it. And then the next one, he had the lights all coming in the right direction. He had done like, I think, something like 50 push-ups like really quickly before he went, so he was kind of pumped up anyway. Did like a couple of curls with dumbbells, so his arms were pumped up extra anyway. And then like he even had one of the guys spray him with like kind of water to make him look a little bit sweaty as well, kind of shine off the light, and it literally looked like a completely different body. But
Jesus.
He said it was just entirely to do with the conditions of the photo, and he actually did a video showing the process of doing the two, and it was all around that. And I was like, that was interesting, because the first time I'd seen a kind of a male influencer address that kind of like, you know, this is what we look like for our photos and this is what we do online, but it's not reality and it's not real, you know. And I think that's something, you know, you even hear like when you see people in those shapes, they talk about how it's not sustainable, and it's, you know, it's probably something they've peaked for, that they will not be at that weight, you know, 99% of the time, and they're just for that photo shoot or whatever. So I think that's something that, you know, probably online isn't really addressed as much on the male side as it is on the female side.
Yeah, I know, Cormac, you post a lot in your stories, you know, about on a slightly different topic, you know, not having a good training session, that sort of thing. But what are your thoughts on those, like, in Instagram influencers? Like, you just picture like a 16, 17, 18-year-old male who doesn't know the difference here, isn't aware of what Eoin just outlined there. Like, it's a pretty dangerous spot for them to be in, looking at that all the time, you know?
Yeah, it is. And I think, like, I'm as big, like, my parents be quite a bit old school, like, and they don't really know what Facebook or Instagram is, like, or just know social media, and they think it's evil, or like, and I'd be as big as a defender of social media as anyone, probably, because I genuinely think it's a great means to do really, really powerful things, and the amount of funds and charity work and positive campaigns that go out through social media is amazing. But at the same time, when it comes to this particular issue, it is really, really, it's dangerous at times. It can be, and it's forcing a lot of people, not forcing, but it's causing a lot of people to start really becoming unhealthily obsessed with their body image in a really negative fashion. Like, and I suppose the big thing I harp on about is, probably talk about it more on the training front rather than the food front, is that it's like you're seeing the best of everything. Like, most people don't put up on Instagram if they're having a shit day. Like, they'll tell you when life is good, and they'll put up a picture of when they went for a walk with their missus and their dog. Like, but like they're not going to put up a picture when they have a fight. Like, it's the same for training. It's the same for food. And I just think it's very hard you have to be exceptionally either stoic or really strong-minded individual to see all that stuff and not let it in some way get in on you. It's really, really hard not to. It's human nature, whereby if you see enough of the same thing, or hear enough of the same thing, or listen to enough of the same thing, it will start to penetrate. Look at the US with Trump and the rhetoric. Like, 70 million people voted for him because when you hear enough of the same thing, it starts to ingrain yourself. People wonder why society never did anything about the mother and baby homes in the 40s and 50s and 60s. But like, if you think at the time, there was no internet, there was no means to expand your horizons. The only information you got was from the altar at mass every Sunday. That's the same, and you heard the same rhetoric over and over again. Of course it was going to become ingrained in society, and social media is no different to us in the modern age. We're seeing the same things over and over again, and you're seeing these perfect bodies, and you're seeing these perfect training sessions. And if you, barring that you are someone who just genuinely doesn't give a rat's, which I don't believe there's many of them out there, or you have this really, really insanely good mindset where you can block that out, it's going to get in on you. I don't think it's possible for it not to get in on you. Now, it affects some people more than others and to different degrees, but I think it's human nature.
Well, just as you're talking there, I think to me, like, it would affect me. It would have, in the past, I'd have been one of those people that would have just blocked it out and thought it didn't bother me. But looking back, it definitely subconsciously seeped into my own mindset where when I'm thinking, geez, maybe you aren't fit or you aren't good enough, sort of thing, and you kind of go down that downward spiral then on that basis. Sure, what's the point if you're sure I'm never going to get like that anywhere? I'm never going to have that perfect body, so what's the point really? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that's the problem. It's that kind of like you're sitting there and you know, you can get to that kind of, I think that's the problem, and I think that's why the messaging around it online, and I think, you know, how we kind of communicate that is a difficult one, because I think people can have that mindset, and, you know, if you're not, you know, as Cormac said, if you're not strong-minded enough to kind of block it out, it can really kind of damage you, and you can get to a point where you think, look, it's not possible, or, you know, I'm never going to be able to get to that perfect size, or I'm never going to be able to get to that perfect physique. But then the problem is, I think the biggest thing that, you know, I think that, you know, has to be educated on is like, what is the perfect physique? Well, like, the perfect physique for each individual is very different. And I think the biggest thing for me was, you know, when you stopped playing on the county team, and I suppose size became less of an influence because you probably weren't competing with athletes, you know, as many people of an athletic size. You know, when you're playing a club, it's a little bit more forgiving because, you know, there's less of a competition there. It allowed me to kind of focus more on the playing and the game and the, you know, the ability and the bits that I would have spent years working on to try and offset the size part, because I was never going to be the biggest guy in the field, you know, but I would have, you know, been playing positions like fullback, centre back that required probably a certain physique. And, you know, maybe, you know, probably in hindsight now when I look at it, I might look at, you know, county football now, I still might look at it and go, look, I think I would have done a job at, you know, at any county team. But then again, you might look at it and go, look, when you're looking at guys who are 6'5", you know, 80 to 90 kilos playing centre back, and then, you know, a midfielder who's 6'5" at the same weight coming through, would I have been able to manage that? Maybe not. I think the nice thing is, since I've been able to step away, I've been able to realize that particular physique that I was trying to reach for, which at county level seemed to be all that was expected and, you know, was what was required, you know, meant that, you know, I felt lost, and that's why I quit, because I was like, look, I can't achieve that, it's impossible. But then getting to go back and play with your club and just enjoy the game for what it is, and spend less time worrying about the weight and more time on the play, and you start to realize that actually size and physique and the perfect size, I think, is different for every individual. And I was able to figure out what, at least to some extent, figure out what mine is and try and maximize that, and not worry too much about what I'd like to become based on what other people are. And now, as I said, it's still something I struggle with, and I probably always will, but I've been able to at least accept certain things, that I'm never going to be 6'5" and 90 kilos of pure muscle. It's just not, you know, genetically possible. And at this point, I'm okay with that. But there were times where I thought I'd try and push it and see how far it could go.
It's interesting you say that, Eoin. It's like, and it's even at the end there when you're like similar to Cormac when you're saying like perfect, you know, the perfect training session, for example. You're you like know, you accept it, but you still the odd time would find yourself or catch yourself, you know, dropping back into that mindset. So it's important for people to realize that even though you'd only lived through it, you've learned to completely accept it. It's still the odd time will be a small bit of a struggle to you at times, and you'd have to kind of catch yourself. Get yourself out of that mindset kind of thing. So it's not the case that it's perfect now for you.
No, I think, and I think I'm sure Cormac will agree. It's something that you just learn to kind of deal with. I think it's something you learn to kind of, you'll always kind of, you know, there'll be times where you struggle, and it's the same with anything. And it's funny actually. You know, I think now that, you know, mental health, I suppose, gets talked about a little bit more broadly, you realize it's a spectrum like anything else. You know, having mental health doesn't mean that you have depression. There are limits to it, and like having mental challenges and relapses, okay, maybe isn't to the extent that you need to go and see a psychologist or a counselor, but it still means that you might go through periods where your brain's telling you something that is debilitating and shouldn't be said, but it's just the way it is. And so there's always going to be times where you're in a position where you're, you know, slightly feeling down, and then you will sit to yourself and go, step on that scales or look at that mirror and go, fuck, why am I, you know, the size of the weight I should be? But that's life, and that's just something. And it's, I think personally, it's probably something I've come to realize is, you know, just a struggle that I have. I think I've probably, you know, just, you know, threw it aside at times and thought, this isn't an issue, and the stand on the scales isn't a problem, and thinking about my weight isn't an issue. And I think it's only since I've stepped away from the county team, and it's been 5-6 years since, and I look back on the experience and I realize maybe it actually was, a bit of an unhealthy problem, and not mental illness to that of an extent, but mental weakness, and struggle that I think I just had, and is something I've had to deal with. And I think before I was just like, it's just part of the game. Everyone deals with these things, but I think everyone deals with their own things in different ways. And I think I've come to accept that it was it's something I've just got to kind of deal with, rather than it is something that's part of me and is in me. And I'm sure Cormac has his own thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think the most important part you raised there is how it's such a spectrum, and I think people, like, a lot of these issues aren't black and white, as you said, on and I think that's really where this kind of conversation in a wider sense needs to go, for people to kind of be more aware of this and probably feel that, okay, maybe it's normal that I'm having these thoughts. Like, I, for example, would be very, very hesitant to ever claim that I have an eating disorder, because I don't think I do, but I definitely have disorderly eating habits. I would be very hesitant to say that the three of us have, I don't know what defines body dysmorphia, but a diagnosis of body dysmorphia, but I would imagine that the three of us would probably agree that we've all had very distorted views of our body. And there's a fine line between those things, and it is, as you said, on a spectrum. And I think that's when it gets to that, when people start realizing it comes in all different ways and forms, that's when a conversation starts to become easier. I know on the mental health thing, like, very much in the past, it was like, oh, he has depression, he has bipolar disorder, or you're fine. There was no in between. And I think it's only in recent years since people have accepted that you don't have to be depressed clinically to feel really down for a few days. And it's when that kind of grey area started coming to the forefront that people started becoming really more open and honest about it. And I think when it comes to kind of food and body image, I think that's where the realization, I think there needs to be a realization that it's okay to be somewhere in between. And I think that's how the conversation becomes more normal, particularly amongst men, I'd say.
It's important we don't label people, and I think that's, like you mentioned, black and white labeling, and I think it's just an old thing that we always kind of look for that black and white. And if you're labeling someone that, he's got an eating disorder, for example, and I think it's just a lazy thing that you kind of catch yourself doing sometimes, or like, not saying but like, people do tend to just latch on to labels, sort of thing,
and boxing people off. I think it's funny, actually, and I think it's only that when you messaged me about doing this conversation around body image, I think at the time, I know we'd spoken briefly about it, but I got a bit kind of like of a step back, because I remember you mentioned it to me. He said, "Yeah, I think we'd have a good conversation." And I remember I sat down at the time thinking, what would I know about body image? Because it's so funny how when I don't think about it, I forget that there is something there that I think about it a bit more. Because it's just so part of my day to day. And as you said, you don't want to be careful to say you have a chronic condition or anything like that. And of course, I don't think any of us do. But so therefore you go, I don't have a problem and I'm fine. And so you just put it to the back of your head and you don't think about it. And, you stand on the scales, you look in the mirror, you do your thing. And it was funny how when you mentioned it, and even today I was sitting there going like, do I really have anything to say on this topic? Because I don't feel like I have anything serious that I've dealt with. But then it's only when you kind of sit down and actually have these questions and ask these questions or have these conversations, but the more I start to realize that, we all have our own thing. We all have our own gray area. And I think you're right, Cormac, in a sense, once people are comfortable that there is a gray area, that you don't have to have a chronic condition to be allowed to talk about it. It's kind of like, I feel people are embarrassed to mention that they have something not right with themselves because they're like, I'm not clinically depressed, or I don't have a chronic eating disorder or something. So therefore I'm embarrassed to mention it because I feel like I'm insulting someone who actually maybe is really suffering.
Exactly.
But that's not fair. I don't think that's fair. And I think that's something that, I think has to be a big part of trying to broaden this conversation, is that it's completely cool to talk about your own issues and struggles. with respect to the people who have serious chronic conditions, but you shouldn't feel guilty about talking about yours, because everyone's is at a different scale.
You've got it in one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually funny you said that. I hadn't thought of it that way, Owen. Like, if I don't know how I would have felt if someone approached me, do you know what I mean? And I'd be there going, well, what do you know what I mean? But I guess like you said, like I'd move on to like binge eating, just because I know, Cormac, you struggle with this. So like binge eating was a big part of how I got, like, you'd go on a night out and next thing it's a week later and you've just been eating shite all week, like, and you'd be ordering Domino's on a Tuesday or Wednesday. You're never like in a great spot when you do, and like that's fine. Again, like to have, like what's the word? You shouldn't feel bad about doing that the odd time when not binge eating, but just like that one order. But when it just becomes, for me, it was all or nothing. Like I used to go to the shop and buy like more food than you could imagine. Like like, so that's something I struggle with. And I know you've spoken in the past that when you were like trying to lose weight, you do well, and it probably wasn't that healthy, and then you'd go the other way then completely and go on the binge eating sort of thing, which I know a lot of people can resonate with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a strange behavior, and all of a sudden you feel like you're out of control. And I suppose when I was being really, really restrictive, it would have happened every so often. I might, like, my diet would be as clean as anything, and I might be like, right after that game on the 28th, I'll get a pizza, and like it would turn into a pizza, a tub of Ben and Jerry's, a bag of cookies, like a tub of jelly. Like, it would just be like insane the amount of food I'd put into my body, and it would be like complete out of control. Like you're halfway through and you don't even want the rest of it and you're still eating. And then I'd get really, really restrictive again. I'd cut my calories way down, and then I might have another like per se bad food for another month. So that was one way I experienced it. And then the other way, I suppose, which I found really, really challenging, is I kind of came to terms that my behaviors were a bit unhealthy about 2 years ago, and I kind of made a conscious decision. I was like, right, I need to do something about this. I was like, I need to try figure out where it's coming from or what I can do to get a better handle of it. So I started going to psychotherapy, and I also kind of made a conscious decision that I needed to put on a bit of weight. I had just gone way too thin, way too scrawny, and I said, right, I'm going to try eat more, I'm going to try lift more, and I'm going to try put on weight. And with that, it became a real, not a massive struggle over the past 2 years, but there's been times where I have struggled, whereby all of a sudden you're eating more, and it's very hard to not still have that black and white mindset of, oh, I've eaten that bar of chocolate, I've fucked the whole thing now, I might as well just go the whole hog. And that's been a real challenge of trying to eat more and trying to put on weight, is that inevitably sometimes when I've been trying to eat more, it's been hard to get the black and white mindset out of my head. And some days, there have been days, even in the past couple of weeks, where I've been eating more, and then something in my mind has just been like, oh, well, you've had that extra bowl of cereal now, you've fucked the whole thing, and I've just did the dog on it, like, and it's really, really challenging. And I still struggle with it. I'm still struggling with the occasional binge now, equally as much as when, not equally as much, I won't say equally as much, to a degree as much as when I was being really, really restrictive. When it does happen, it's probably not as intense. There's probably not as much kind of self-loathing attached to it. But yeah, trying to eat more is hard. It's been tricky. It still happens.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, actually, because like I can actually completely relate to that, like, in the sense that while my binge eating was terrible, it's not as bad now. But like last week, like the other night, for example, I would have just got something small, and next thing it was just kind of spiral out of control for the night, and the next day you're gone, you get back, you out on the horse a little bit quicker, I guess. But it's always there, not all or nothing. But you start like hating yourself a little bit more, and it's just kind of like we talked about earlier, I guess, a vicious cycle. Like it's funny how like you said, there's three kind of completely different stories here, and everyone's kind of got a similar, or can relate a small bit to everyone. And I guess if you had another 7 people on the podcast and made it 10, you'd have 10 different stories. Because when I was thinking of how to set this up, I wasn't like 100% sure how to go about and who to ask. And the reason I asked you guys is just because I think like everyone has their own story, and I know you guys can articulate that very well, and I think a lot of people listening will get something out of it. Like because I always kind of, it's a hard question to me to ask here on, like, in terms of like advice, because I don't think general advice is good, but I suppose to people listening, like, it's just a case that talking to people about it, like I think I've been more open here in the last 50 minutes than I have with any of my friends ever about these issues. You know what I mean? As I mentioned earlier, I used to always kind of lead the jokes about me when I wasn't in best condition, because I wanted to get there first, sort of thing. What would you say to people listening there in terms of just keep talking, I guess, or when I say keep talking, to start talking?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what we spoke about just a little bit, as Cormac was saying. It's like normalizing that grey area. It's about knowing that everyone has their own little niggles mentally, things like that. I think it's interesting. I read an article today about, or the other day, I think, about how one of the Limerick players, I think it was the Limerick players actually, one of the Limerick hurlers was saying how during lockdown, like at the start of the lockdown, when it looked like there was no training happening, they had their sports scientist or psychologist who's involved in their team. I think she's like one, like, has a
Garrod Hegarty is the hurler. Yeah,
Garrod Hegarty. Yeah, exactly. So,
and I wrote the article.
Did you?
Well, I did. Well, no, it was a group interview, but go on. Sorry.
Yeah.
I know the one.
Yeah, you know the one. So, like, what I was saying was, what was funny about it was he was talking about how he was real conscious about the training and the fact that he was, you know, they were missing out in training or something, and he was like, I got to get back in training, and she was talking about the importance of rest. And I think what's becoming normalized is there's a lot more to kind of like body image, physical fitness and all that than just actually like going out and smacking out training or things like that. And you kind of have to be a bit more aware of it, I think. And it's nice to see people are talking about that a bit more. It's nice to see that that's becoming normalized more. It's nice to see that things around the mental side of the game and life is becoming a bit more talked about. But I think, you know, if anything's to come from this, I think it is the fact that people shouldn't be embarrassed about talking about the things. You know, I felt that, you know, as I said, when you asked me, I was like, Jesus, I feel a bit embarrassed now because I feel like I don't have something to talk about, or I don't have a strong enough issue to discuss. But I don't think that's not the point. It's not about how serious an issue you have. It's literally about being comfortable about talking about it, and then being open to listen to other people, and probably, you know, as much as being comfortable talking about your own issues, then being in a position where you can give someone a platform to talk about theirs and be happy to have an open conversation, because that makes everything easier. And what's interesting is, you know, from my perspective, it's all about gaining weight. From your perspective, you know, it was about, you know, losing weight. But what's funny, how there's so many similarities in our experiences, be it standing on scales and looking in the mirror, and it makes it a little bit easier, it makes it a little bit more normal. It makes you feel less, you know, odd, and it also makes it easier to talk about, because you probably didn't talk about it before because you're like, are other people thinking about this? Because as I think it was you said earlier on, Cormac, about how this is not something lads should have to deal with. I don't think this way, but clearly they do. And I think it's nice that no matter the situation, there's lots of similarities you can share.
Yeah, Cormac, do you want to kind of give like a final point and advice, and I guess off the back of what I was saying in talking, and just I guess sometimes for people the hardest thing to do is just to reach out and say that one line. And then I know I've had experience in different kind of situations, and when you say that one line to reach out to someone, it's like that wasn't a big deal at all. It's not why you made such a big deal of it. I don't know if you've had that experience.
Yeah, it is, and it's a tricky one. I think this is real kind of taboo amongst men our age at the moment. And no matter how much the three will say just talk, I still think some people are going to find it really, really hard, because I think a lot of men would find this topic embarrassing. I'd be just kind of saying, if anyone does listen to this and can resonate, is more just a reassurance that as much as you're second guessing yourself or thinking, am I going crazy here? Like that the three of us can assure you you're not. Because 2 years ago when I was doing mad stuff, I was kind of like, am I losing it? And if something like this had been there, or I would have heard or read something like this, I think it would have at least just helped dampen things down 1% or 2%. So if you're not at the stage where you can't say it to one of your mates, oh, here, look, I'm struggling with this, which a lot of people won't be able to, just kind of be safe in the knowledge that we're pretty sure this is out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you guys are saying, like sometimes you're almost reaching out to someone to talk to, but also getting that bit of advice on how to go about improving your life as well. So it's not just a case of talking and, you know, making yourself, you know, get that problem out there. It's also a case that people have the answers out there, and they're usually in a group of your mates, and you can do it together, sort of thing as well. So listen, Eoin, Cormac, really appreciate you guys coming on the podcast. Thanks a mil for coming on.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks.
Yeah. And for those listening, at Tackling Sport on social media.